Hey, Joe Walsh here. Now what? Huh? Now what when it comes to Trump and Putin? We'll talk about that when Freedom returns at 5.
Hey. Good morning, Dan and Amy. All right, let's run the gamut of reaction from most hysterical to least yesterday. See where you fall on the spectrum. Of course, here's a former CIA director and inveterate liar, John Brennan, on President Trump's presser after the sit-down with Putin.
I cannot understand how the national security team can continue to abide by this, and how Pompeo and Bolton and Kelly can continue in their jobs. This, I think, rises to the point of good American patriots resigning in objection to that performance by Donald Trump. Again, words, I'm at a loss of words to describe just how outrageous his words, his statements, his behavior has been. And one can only conclude that he fears Vladimir Putin, and that one-on-one discussion, who knows what was discussed there, and how Mr. Putin now is the master puppeteer of Donald Trump, the person who is in our Oval Office.
Yeah, a lot of facts, not evidence there, but the accusation of rising to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors, treasonous. That's what the left has been saying. Also, the conspiracy theories about passing intelligence in their private meeting, about having compromising information. Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley suggested something like the P-tape does exist. Well, let's present it then. Usually a more sensible voice, calm arbiter of affairs, Neil Cavuto at Fox Business had this to say.
This was the time and the place for the president to look Putin squarely in the eye and said, you will be punished for what you did in 2016 and don't ever think about doing that again.
But he didn't. And that's what made it disgusting. That's what made his performance disgusting. I'm sorry, it's just the only way I feel. It's not a right or left thing to me. It's just wrong. A U.S. president on foreign soil talking to our biggest enemy or adversary or competitor, I don't know how we define them these days, is essentially letting the guy get away with this and not even, offering a mild criticism. That sets us back a lot.
So you go from Brennan and some of the co-conspiracy theorists to Cavuto.
And Laura Ingraham, she chimed in as well. And then there's, Republican lawmakers. Of course, John McCain, we knew that was going to happen. Jeff Flake, Senator Flake. But Bob Corker said something. Kevin McCarthy piped in.
Yes.
I mean, this is Kevin McCarthy.
I believe the intelligence community and also the House intelligence community that Russia meddled in it. We should do everything we can to hold them accountable.
So those are the more mild rebukes and just restating confidence in the intelligence community as well as his colleagues on the Hill who've been investigating these same matters like Devin Nunes's committee. And then Stephen Cohen yesterday on Tucker Carlson, the well-respected Russian studies professor, formerly of NYU as well as Princeton. He had this to say about the greatest threat now facing our representative republic.
No, and nor have I in these decades you mentioned ever heard an elected member of Congress say that we should have no relations with the Russians at all. Presumably that would include nuclear weapons control. When I see, I guess it was a Democrat on the bottom of your screen, asking what are the Russians doing in the White House anyway? Well, they're doing with President Trump the national security of our nation, because what's at stake here is a proposal by Putin of Russia, by Trump of America, to join hands in an alliance against international terrorism.
Right.
And I would have asked you, if you had asked me a few days ago, what's the number one threat to the United States today, I would have said international terrorism. I don't know if you agree, Tucker, but it's certainly up there. Today, I would say it's this assault on President Trump because it's been going on a year. And can we be clear? What he's being accused of is treason. This has never happened in America, that there's a Russian agent in the White House. And we've had a whole array of allegations, from Putin helped him get in the White House to his associates are doing wrong things with Russians, that Flynn did something wrong in talking, his former national security advisor did something wrong with talking to the Russian ambassador. There's no evidence that there was any wrongdoing, and indeed Flynn should have talked to the Russian ambassador. That was his job. So This is beyond belief now and has become, by this I mean this assault on Trump and his loyalty, this has become a national security threat to us in itself.
So do we have Staff Sergeant Raymond Shaw in the White House, or is Professor Cohen right? Where's the truth? Somewhere in the middle. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Cliff May, President of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Cliff, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Always good to be with you guys.
So, where do you fall on that spectrum, or are you on the y-axis?
Look, I think it's very simple. I mean, I obviously do not agree with people like John Brennan who have gone totally hysterical and are using this to further their anti-Trump agenda. Do I think that Trump's performance yesterday Monday was disappointing? Absolutely, it was disappointing. He wasn't prepared properly, and he didn't seem to be able to navigate with some pretty rocky waters. Why were they rocky? Because Putin is very much an adversary of the U.S. He is running a country that is and has been killing people. He has taken territory by military force from his neighbors. This is now the third president in a row who cannot seem to deal properly with Putin and with Russia. I don't know quite why that is. I'm sorry this was a disappointing performance. I don't think lasting damage was done. As far as we know, no agreements were made. We still have sanctions on Russia. But if you're going to call balls and strikes, I think you have to say that in this instance, President Trump got up at bat and he whiffed it.
What is the proper way to deal with Putin?
You know, Reagan got along with Gorbachev, who was a much better Russian leader than is Putin, and yet he was also willing to say, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. He could talk to him, he could deal with him, he'd negotiate with him, but he also was strong on the issues that are of vital interest to the U.S. You are not deferential to Putin. There may be things you don't want to answer. You try to see if you can if you can find common ground, but you let him know that we are the strong nation, you are not, and and a lot of what you have been doing, we not only disapprove of, we condemn. You don't go around murdering people in other countries, for one thing. You don't go around stealing the land of your neighbors by military force. If you look at the NATO declaration that came out last week, it very clearly says that NATO exists in large measure because Russia is violating international law on so many levels, and we have to defend the West from Russia. Well, if that's the case, you do not in public act quite so deferential towards Putin, as if he is somebody who deserves great respect. Listen, I will say, Putin is very clever. He's very savvy. He knows how to play even a weak hand, which is all he has, and you consider that he's got an economy about the size of South Korea's. He plays a weak hand well. When it comes to Syria, where he's done terrible damage, he has facilitated over 500,000 deaths by Bashar al-Assad and Hezbollah and Iran. If you recall back, we had Obama saying, "Oh, that's going to be a quagmire." Well, it was a quagmire. There are a lot of things that are a quagmire for Obama are not going to be a quagmire for Putin because he knows how to use the military force he has effectively. But what he is doing in many parts of the world, many of his activities are not just illegal; they are absolutely antithetical to the vital security interests of the United States in the West, and that should be clear in all dealings with him.
And let's not forget, the downing of Malaysian Flight 17 over Ukrainian airspace. I mean, that the 4-year anniversary was yesterday of that, and he didn't hold him accountable to that atrocity either. And that's what upset me the most. I
think you're absolutely right. There are so many things Putin has done that we could just go through. The murdering of journalists in the streets of Moscow, abroad, elsewhere. Just there's absolutely so much. And look, I think this has to be made clear and not conflated. Did Russia meddle? Did they intervene? Did they hack in terms of the most recent elections? Absolutely, that's clear. Did Putin and Trump collude in any way? No, there's no evidence of that whatsoever. Did Putin's actions in this election change the results of the elections? There's not a scintilla of evidence to suggest that's true. Now, part of the problem is that the opponents, not just critics, of President Trump conflate those things, so that if he acknowledges that, yeah, no question, the Russians were messing around with our elections, then people will think, and that's why why Hillary lost, which is not the case. But what Russia was trying to do, I think, and I think it's pretty clear, is undermine our belief in our system of democracy. So he could say, as he does, you have a democratic system, it's very imperfect. We have a democratic system. I'm not claiming it's perfect, but they're essentially equivalent.
Well, that was really the low point in the press conference, right? It was not just the question of who do you believe, but it was Trump behaving like Putin and engaging in moral equivalencies between the United States and Russia, the same way that Putin attempted to do, to say, you call your country a democratic country, small d, I call my country a democratic country. Well, your country is an autocratic country and you're a dictator, and ours is a representative republic and he's a temporary president. Those are two very different things.
Exactly right. It would not have been hard, it seems to me, for Trump to say, I have an intelligence community. They've told me what happened during this election. I'm not pleased about it. I'm not pleased about what you did, and I expect it to stop. You don't have to admit it, but I expect it to stop. Don't do that again. It's not friendly, and there will be repercussions if you continue along this road.
Well, and too, the whole matter of Russian meddling, people say, oh, well, you don't want to offend, and you don't, there's no reason to antagonize because you're trying to make the bigger, better deal with respect to nuclear proliferation and Syria and Iran and other geopolitical interests. But I'm sorry, you made it clear, and Putin made it clear at the press conference, that they disagree about Crimea, that Putin sees this as a legitimate annexation by referendum, and Trump doesn't, and Trump's position, of course, is correct. So if you can openly disagree about Crimea, if you can openly criticize Germany for doing a deal on an energy pipeline with the Russians, then why can't you openly express a difference of opinion on whether or not Russia meddled in the election, no matter how vociferously a thug like Putin says he didn't?
I think that's exactly right. Look, I think a lot of times Trump believes in his own ability to go out there unprepared and wing it. And I suggest that's probably what happened this time. And what he needed to do was sit down with his very good advisors and prepare. There are things where he should have said, I'm just not even going to comment on that, or I'm going to leave us to disagree on that. I'm going to continue to look for common ground between the two countries, but I am also going to be very aware of the ways in which Russia is violating international law and is showing hostility towards America, towards the West, and towards our interests. And I'm going to hope that changes, and if it doesn't, the repercussions will follow. His policies towards Russia have been tougher than the previous president, and probably the one before that. Policies have been good, but this press conference, this was a big disappointment, I think.
What do you think about Stephen Cohen's observations?
It's interesting. Cohen is a man of the left, but he is a defendant he's very defensive of Putin, has been for a long time. Too defensive of Putin generally. What he said in the bite you played, I can't really disagree with. But I'm not on board with Professor Cohen on many things.
Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, including his marriage to Katrina vanden Heuvel.
Well, exactly. I'd like to see some of the breakfast conversations between the two of them, because the Nation magazine is calling Trump a traitor and is trying to impeach him, and just looking every day for the reason that they can do it that particular day, which is what so many of Trump's enemies get up every day to do. And yet Steve Cohen was very defensive of Trump in this instance.
Well, and it's, the left, all of a sudden, their newfound antagonism for the Soviets. It's really interesting to watch, considering they were aghast when Ronald Reagan took a hard line, called the Soviet Union the evil empire, even as he did develop that relationship with Gorbachev that you alluded to. And then more recently, they ridiculed, of course, Mitt Romney for suggesting that Russia posed a threat to our country. So it's great to have the left on board in terms of being anti-totalitarianism for a change.
Exactly. The hypocrisy is enormous.
All right. He is Cliff May, president for the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Cliff, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.